My name is Claire, and for as long as I could remember, I was the one who carried the weight of everything. Family, finances, expectations. At 28, when most people are carving out their careers and finding their ways in life, I found myself juggling a job that barely paid the bills, taking care of my family, and always being the one they turn to when something went wrong. The irony, no one ever really noticed how much I was struggling. I was always the one with the strong shoulders, the one who kept things together. It had been this way for years. From the moment I could remember, I'd been the responsible one. My older brother, Ben, was always the free spirit, floating from one idea to the next. He had a charm about him that made people forget he never stuck around when things got hard. My younger sister, Lily, well, she had a sense of entitlement that seemed to grow with every passing year. And my parents, they were so wrapped up in their own issues that they rarely had the time to see me. It was a Wednesday when the phone call came. I had just finished a long day of work and was preparing to collapse on my couch when my mom's number popped up on my phone. I didn't even need to hear her voice to know what was coming. "Claire, sweetheart, I need a favor," she said. Her voice was thin, almost apologetic, and I could tell she had already asked Ben and Lily. "How much this time?" I asked, sighing, already pulling up my bank account on my phone. "It's Ben's therapy bill," she started, her voice crackling. "It came in today, and we need a little help. You know how much Ben's been struggling." I didn't let her finish. I had been paying Ben's therapy bills for months after his last failed venture. His once promising career in real estate had crashed spectacularly, and my parents had let him move back in, telling him he could stay as long as he needed. They didn't ask how I was doing or if I could even afford it. They didn't care that my own job in marketing was draining me dry. "Mom, you know, I've been paying for this for the last 6 months. Can't you ask him to take some responsibility?" I was trying to keep my voice steady, but it wasn't easy. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her words had the weight of guilt in them. "I know, honey, I know, but Ben is really struggling. You're the only one who can help." I knew that wasn't true. Ben was capable of working, of pulling himself together, but he never seemed to want to. He was always looking for the next quick fix or miracle job, but nothing ever seemed good enough for him. I transferred the money the same way I had done so many times before. Each time, a little part of me died inside, because I knew that even though I was the one supporting them, I was invisible to my family. They only reached out when they needed something, and never, ever offered anything in return. That night, I stared at the ceiling of my tiny apartment, the hum of the city outside mixing with the weight of the loneliness I felt. Ben had promised that after the therapy, he would get his act together, that he would find a new job and start contributing. That was over a year ago. Now he was living in the basement of my parents' house, still working on himself, while I was slowly drowning in debt and stress. I should have known that things would get worse when my mom called again, just 2 days later. "Claire," she said, her tone cautious, "we've been talking, and we think it would be a good idea for all of us to go on a vacation. You've been working so hard, and it's been so stressful for you." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had no time for a vacation. My life was a constant battle between my job, my family, and trying to keep my sanity intact. And yet, the suggestion that we take a family trip to somewhere exotic, like a Rome, felt like salt in an open wound. "I can't just leave everything behind," I said, trying to push down the knot in my stomach. "I have bills to pay, and someone has to keep things together here." My mom's voice took on that familiar, almost pleading tone. It's just a few days. Sweethearts, we'll go, and you can rest. We've already found a good deal for the trip. You've been working so hard. You deserve this. The words sounded too familiar, too rehearsed. My mom had a way of manipulating situations to get what she wanted. But this time, something in me snapped. I'm not going on any trip. I can't just abandon everything like that. But my mom's words lingered in my mind long after the call ended. I could already hear Ben in the background, complaining about how he couldn't go. The guilt of never being good enough was always hanging over my head. I knew that the only reason they wanted to go on this trip was to escape the pressure of reality. I knew they wouldn't consider my sacrifices or how much I was already doing for the family. 2 weeks after that phone call, everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening when I was driving home from work, mind preoccupied with the stress of my daily grind, when everything came crashing down. I don't remember much about the accident itself. One moment, I was merging onto the highway, and the next, there was a deafening screech of tires, a jarring impact, and then nothing. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, my body aching with a pain I had never known before. I could hear distant voices, the low murmur of nurses and doctors, but it wasn't until I tried to move that I realized how serious the injury was. My body was broken, and I needed surgery. The days following were a blur of pain, medication, and endless waiting. My parents didn't visit at first. They didn't know about the accident right away because I hadn't had the strength to call anyone. But then I heard the familiar voice of my mother through the door. "Claire, sweetheart, we're so sorry." "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. I tried to smile, but the pain was too much. The nurse had informed me that the car crash was severe, and I had been lucky to survive. It was just a routine surgery. But it wasn't going to be easy. And then came the bombshell. "You know, we've been planning this trip for months," my mom said, her voice unnervingly calm. "We've got everything booked, and we can't cancel now. We're still going." I couldn't believe it. There, I was lying in a hospital bed, barely able to move. And my parents were talking about going on a vacation that I had paid for. They had just walked in, as if nothing had happened, and were already discussing their trip to Rome. "We think it's best if Katie goes with us," my mom continued, almost as if she were explaining a simple change of plans. "She really needs a break. You'll be fine here, Claire. Just rest up, and we'll go enjoy ourselves." My stomach twisted. I was so stunned that I couldn't even speak. My sister, the one who had never worked a day in her life, was going to take the trip I had paid for, while I lay in a hospital bed, alone and abandoned. For the first time, I realized how deeply my family had taken me for granted. I had spent years being their caretaker, and now, when I needed them the most, they had abandoned me for a vacation. The last thing my mom said to me before leaving was, "Don't worry about the house while we're gone. Sweetie, we'll take care of everything. Just focus on getting better." And just like that, they left. My own family walked out on me when I needed them the most. But they weren't the only ones who had left me behind. The days after my family left were a blur of discomfort, medication, and emotional turmoil. Every time I opened my eyes, I felt a rush of resentment toward my parents and my sister. They had left me physically alone in a hospital bed after a car crash I could barely remember. They had stolen the trip I had worked so hard for, turning my gift into an absurd vacation for themselves. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I spent the next couple of days trying to process what had happened, my mind swirling with questions and anger. How could they have done this? How could they have taken a trip that I had planned for them, with money I had earned? While I was lying here, recovering, the betrayal was heavy, and the weight of it sat on my chest like a stone. But something started to change within me. As I lay in bed, recovering from surgery, something inside me clicked. I had always been the one to keep things together for my family. I had always been the one to bear the financial strain, the emotional burden, the expectations. But now I had reached my breaking point. I could no longer be the person they leaned on without any regard for my own well-being. A shift happened. It was subtle at first, a small voice telling me to stop being the martyr, stop being the one who always gives without ever receiving. I realized that in order to protect myself, I had to put up boundaries. I had to stop enabling their behavior, and the first step was cutting them off. I picked up my phone, the one they had bombarded with calls and texts. There were dozens of missed calls from my mom, my dad, and Katie. They were frantic, all of them desperate. Their messages flowed in my inbox, but this time I wasn't going to pick up. I wasn't going to listen to their guilt trips. They didn't deserve that privilege anymore. My finger hovered over the screen, and with a deep breath, I blocked their numbers. Each block was an act of liberation. The knot that had been tightening in my chest for years began to loosen. I blocked my mom, my dad, and Katie, one by one. Then I turned off my phone and set it on the bedside table for the first time in a long time. I felt like I could breathe. I knew that blocking them wouldn't fix everything. It wouldn't erase the hurt, the frustration, the betrayal, but it was a necessary step. I needed time. I needed space. And I needed to regain control over my own life. The following morning, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Dr. Olivia, the surgeon who had performed my operation. He walked into my room with a gentle smile, carrying my phone, which he had apparently confiscated during his rounds. "I think you're strong enough now to handle this," he said, placing the phone on my bedside table. "But I wouldn't blame you if you leave it off a little longer." I nodded, feeling a bit of anxiety flutter in my chest. But I also felt a surge of independence. I wasn't going to let their desperate messages control me anymore. After Dr. Olivia left, I took a deep breath and picked up my phone. The notifications were overwhelming, but I wasn't going to let them overwhelm me. I scrolled through the messages. Some were angry, others pleading, but all of them were filled with the same sense of entitlement and manipulation that I had come to expect. My mom, frantic and upset, told me I was being selfish. Katie, filled with venom, accused me of ruining everything. But there was one message that stood out from the others. It was from my dad. "Claire, you don't know how hard this has been for us. We're stuck here, without the trip we were supposed to enjoy, without the luxury we thought we'd have. It's your fault. You ruined everything." Reading that message was like a slap in the face. My stomach churned. This was the same man who had never once called to ask how I was doing after my accident, who had never once checked on me. And now he was blaming me for their own irresponsibility. I couldn't take it anymore. I set the phone down, ignoring the next incoming message. Instead of responding, I did what I should have done months ago. I started making plans for myself. The next few weeks were a turning point. I focused all my energy on healing physically, but also mentally. I started therapy to help me process the emotional toll my family's abandonment had caused. The doctor encouraged me to be kind to myself, to acknowledge the pain, and to forgive myself for allowing them to manipulate me for so long. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to rebuild my life. I found strength in my independence, no longer burdened by the expectations of my family. I was free to live for myself. I could go to work without worrying about paying for someone else's mistakes. I could go out with friends, enjoy my weekends, and focus on things that brought me joy. One day, while sitting at my favorite cafe with a cup of coffee, I made a decision. I was going to Rome, the trip that I had planned for my family. The trip that had been stolen from me. I was going to do it for myself. I didn't have to compromise. I didn't have to wait for anyone else. I could live the experience exactly the way I had imagined it. I booked the flights, the hotels, and the tours, all for myself. This time, there would be no one to let down, no one to blame. It would be my trip, on my terms. The day I left for Rome was a bittersweet one. I boarded the plane with a mixture of excitement and relief. It felt like the first time in a long time that I was doing something for me. There was no guilt, no anger, just anticipation for the journey ahead. As I walked through the cobblestone streets of Rome, the sunlight dappling through the trees, I felt a peace I had never known before. I was finally free. I could breathe without the weight of expectations on my shoulders. I was living the life I had always dreamed of, and I was doing it on my own terms. And when I stood at the top of the Spanish Steps, looking out at the city below, I knew that I had made the right decision. I had reclaimed my life, and nothing was going to take that away from me again. It wasn't just about the trip. It was about taking back control of my own narrative, my own story. I had spent so many years putting others first, sacrificing my own happiness for their sake. But now, I was the one who mattered. I let go of the past and walked forward into a future where I was no longer burdened by the needs and manipulations of my family. I was free, and that, I realized, was the greatest gift I could have ever given myself.